The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Imperial War Museum in London, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Among the steady stream of visitors, an elderly man moved slowly through the Special Forces exhibition, his weathered hands gripping a wooden cane. His eyes, still sharp despite his 85 years, studied each display with an intensity that caught the attention of nearby museum staff. Sarah Mitchell, a young curator in her late 20s, noticed him first. He stood motionless before the SAS display, his gaze fixed on a particular photograph from the Falklands War. There was something unsettling about his stillness, the way his fingers trembled slightly as they traced the air near the glass case. When he began speaking to himself in a low voice, reciting details about operations that weren't even mentioned on the display cards, Sarah's concern grew. The elderly man moved closer to a section dedicated to David Stirling, the founder of the Special Air Service. His voice grew louder as he pointed at specific items, correcting information on the plaques, mentioning dates and locations that seemed far too specific for a casual visitor. Sarah exchanged worried glances with her colleague, Marcus, who stood near the entrance. In their experience, elderly visitors sometimes became confused or disoriented in the museum's maze-like corridors. As the man reached toward a display case containing a winged dagger badge, Sarah decided to intervene. She approached him gently, her voice soft and reassuring. The elderly visitor turned to face her, and she was struck by the clarity in his blue eyes. There was no confusion there, no disorientation. Instead, she saw something else entirely, a deep sadness mixed with determination. He introduced himself as Thomas Whitmore, and before Sarah could redirect him toward the museum exit, he began telling her things about the SAS that made her blood run cold. He knew operational details that had never been publicly disclosed. He spoke of training exercises in the Scottish Highlands that happened decades before any official records acknowledged them. He described the exact layout of a forward operating base in Oman that Sarah had only read about in classified documents during her research. Marcus, growing increasingly alarmed, quietly radioed for security. The protocol was clear. When visitors displayed unusual behavior or claimed knowledge of sensitive military operations, security needed to be notified. Two guards approached discreetly, their polite smiles masking their readiness to escort Thomas from the building. But Thomas wasn't finished. As the security guards drew near, he pulled up the sleeve of his worn tweed jacket, revealing a tattoo that made everyone freeze. There, faded but unmistakable, was the winged dagger of the SAS, accompanied by a service number 2739. The tattoo was old, clearly decades old, the ink spread and blurred in the way that only genuine vintage tattoos become. Sarah's mind raced. She had spent years studying SAS history, and she knew that service numbers in that range corresponded to the earliest members of the regiment, men who had served with David Stirling himself in North Africa during World War II. If this man's tattoo was authentic, he wasn't just any veteran. He was a living piece of history that everyone assumed had been lost. The security guards paused, uncertain. Thomas seized the moment. He began recounting a story that no history book had ever recorded. He spoke of a mission in 1942, deep behind enemy lines in Libya. His unit of 12 men had been tasked with destroying a German fuel depot that intelligence suggested was critical to Rommel's supply chain. The operation wasn't in any official record because it had been a complete disaster. Thomas' voice cracked as he described how they had walked into an ambush. 8 of his brothers in arms had died in the first minutes of the firefight. The remaining 4 had somehow fought their way out, completing the mission even as bullets tore through the desert night around them. They had destroyed the depot and made it back to British lines 3 days later, half-dead from dehydration and wounds. But the mission was classified and then buried. The losses had been too significant, the intelligence faulty. The operation became one of the SAS quiet failures, never officially acknowledged. The 4 survivors were sworn to secrecy, their actions erased from the official record. Thomas and his 3 comrades had carried that secret for over 70 years. Now, he was the last one left. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, quickly searching through digital archives. Thomas continued speaking, mentioning names, dates, and locations. With each detail, Sarah's verification searches came back positive. This man knew things that only someone who had been there could know. The museum director was called. Within 20 minutes, the exhibition floor was quietly cleared, and Thomas was escorted not out of the building, but to a private office upstairs. What followed was 8 hours of the most extraordinary oral history session the museum had ever conducted. Thomas spoke of training with David Stirling, of learning unconventional warfare tactics that would later become the foundation of modern special operations. He described the camaraderie, the fear, the impossible odds they faced night after night in the desert. He spoke of men whose names appeared nowhere in the official histories, heroes who had died in the sand, their sacrifices known only to their comrades. The museum's military historians were called in. Each fact Thomas mentioned was cross-referenced and verified. Old operational maps were pulled from archives. The classified intelligence reports were examined. Everything he said aligned perfectly with fragmentary evidence that historians had never been able to fully piece together. Thomas Whitmore wasn't confused or delusional. He was filling in blanks that had existed in SAS history for 8 decades. As evening approached, Thomas grew tired. But before he rested, he made one request. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. Inside were names, 23 names of men who had served and died in those early, undocumented operations. Thomas asked that these names be added to the museum's memorial, that these forgotten warriors finally receive the recognition they deserve. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the list. Each name represented a son, a brother, a father who had died in service to his country and then been erased from history. Thomas explained that he had kept this notebook for 70 years, waiting for the right moment to bring these men home, at least in memory. The museum director immediately agreed. Plans were made for a special memorial ceremony. Military historians began the process of tracking down descendants of the men on Thomas' list. The few remaining SAS veterans from that era were contacted. What had started as a security concern had transformed into one of the most significant historical discoveries in the museum's history. But the story didn't end there. Thomas' testimony opened doors to other classified archives. His detailed accounts prompted the Ministry of Defense to review their classification policies on World War II special operations. Within months, dozens of previously sealed files were declassified, revealing the true extent of the early SAS operations and the men who had fought in them. Thomas became a regular visitor to the museum, working with historians to ensure the accuracy of the new exhibits being planned. His memory, despite his age, proved remarkably sharp. He could recall the smell of cordite in the desert air, the taste of sand in his rations, the exact sound of a German machine gun in the distance. His accounts brought the history alive in ways that documents never could. 6 months after that fateful afternoon, the museum held a special ceremony. A new memorial wall was unveiled, bearing the names of the 23 men from Thomas' notebook. Descendants of those fallen warriors stood together, many meeting for the first time, finally learning the truth about how their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had died. Thomas stood before the wall, his hand trembling as he saluted his long-lost brothers. The ceremony was attended by current SAS members, a rare public appearance by the regiment. They stood in silent tribute, honoring the men who had laid the foundation for everything they had become. The regimental commander personally thanked Thomas for his service and for ensuring that these heroes would never be forgotten again. Thomas Whitmore passed away peacefully 18 months later, at the age of 87. His funeral was attended by military personnel from around the world. He was buried with full military honors, his coffin draped with the Union Jack, carried by serving SAS soldiers. The winged dagger badge was pinned to the flag, finally official after all those years. But his legacy lived on. The exhibition he had helped create became one of the museum's most visited displays. School children learned about the early SAS operations. Historians published papers based on his testimony. The 23 names on the memorial wall were no longer forgotten. They had been brought home. Sarah Mitchell, now the head curator of military history at the museum, often stood before Thomas' photograph in the exhibition. She remembered that afternoon when an old man with a cane had seemed confused, when they had almost called security to remove him. She thought about how close they had come to dismissing him, to losing all that history forever. The incident changed how the museum trained its staff. Now, everyone understood that history wasn't just in the displays and documents. Sometimes it walked through the door on shaky legs, carrying secrets that needed to be told before time ran out. Thomas Whitmore had taught them that the most important artifacts aren't always behind glass. Sometimes they're in the memories of quiet heroes who never sought recognition but deserved it nonetheless.